So now we are in the process of going live on Zoom, and I'm about to go live on Facebook. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience as we get all of the technology ducks in a row here. Thank you, everyone who's joining us from the waiting room. We really appreciate your patience, and we are so grateful to you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us, talk about diversity and inclusion as acquisition and retention strategies in EMS. Wonderful, and just one more second while we get ready to go live on Facebook. I will be monitoring questions on Facebook as well, so if you are miraculously seeing this on the Facebook live stream, then you will know that you can ask questions in the chat box. So just one second. Perfect, and now we are live in both places. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you so much for joining us today for the American Ambulance Association's Magnets, Glue, and Curb Cuts. This is our member session on how diversity and inclusion can drive recruitment, retention, and excellence in EMS. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our panelists today. We'll be hearing from Sharon Taulbert from Mecklenburg EMS Agency outside in Charlotte, Chris Anderson, Director of Operations from Bell Ambulance in Milwaukee, our esteemed favorite panelist, Scott Moore Esquire, AAA HR and Operations Consultant, as well as Principal Consultant for Moore EMS Consulting. So you know, because you are watching this broadcast, that we are live both on Zoom as a member webinar, as well as to the 11,000 followers of the AAA's Facebook page. If you're joining us through Zoom, you can connect to the panelists via the Q&A box. It is the double dialog box icon. The chat box, which has a single dialogue, is the best place if you're having technical issues with your audio or if you would like to share resources on a peer-to-peer basis. If you're joining us on Facebook, please use the comments of the video to ask the comments underneath the video to ask your questions. And please be sure to like or love the stream and share it to your own profile so that your friends and colleagues can join us as well. So just a quick disclaimer, this webinar is not legal advice, although we do have our Counselor Moore on the line here. This is a informal dialogue so that we can share a few of the best practices, ideas, and innovations that some of our members from across the country have brought to diversity and inclusion. This is not meant to be an exhaustive treatise or a scholarly work. This is very focused on the practicality of bringing a more diverse and inclusive perspective to mobile healthcare. As we continue our disclaimers, please be aware that we know that this topic can be perceived as politically charged or uncomfortable for a number of people. That's not our intention here. Everyone on this webinar is approaching this topic with the highest level of sensitivity and an attitude and approach that we hope that you will find inclusive and welcoming. And we ask that you keep all comments, whether on Zoom or on Facebook, inclusive, welcoming, and positive as well. One other important thing to remember as we approach this topic is that there's no neutral or objective perspective on diversity or inclusion or anything else for that matter. As you join us today and as we participate as panelists, you're bringing to this presentation your own unique characteristics and backgrounds that inform your perceptions regarding these issues, and we ask you to be sensitive both to your own, aware of your own sensitivities and sensitive to those of others. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to turn this afternoon's presentation over to Sharon Taulbert. Sharon is the Deputy Director at Medic EMS outside of Charlotte, and her service is particularly exemplary for the way that they've been able to integrate diversity and inclusion to every aspect of their operations. Why did they do such a thing? Both because they believe in it as a personal value, as well as because diversity so effectively drives excellence in healthcare, as well as almost any other business where this has been studied. You can see that companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to beat the market, even in something like financial services. So we believe that those same approaches can drive excellence and enhance service to our community. So with that, Sharon, would you like to take us through a few of the innovations that Medic has put into place that help you drive inclusivity and retention in North Carolina?
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I would love to. Good afternoon, everybody. And do you have control, Amanda? I'm sorry. All right. A couple of things that I will talk through today as we look at the larger scope of diversity inclusion, how that can increase and improve our retention. So we'll touch on each one of these. The last 4 slides are really about initiatives that we have done to enhance our efforts. We know in looking at decades of research from different scientific perspectives and specialties that socially diverse groups, those with a diversity of race, ethnicity, and gender, they will have more innovative approaches, they'll make better decisions, and they'll do so more rapidly than homogeneous groups. So as seen at the bottom of our slides, our priorities are our patients, our people, our stewardship. We genuinely are interested in fostering well-being in our patients and our people. And social scientists continue to study and reveal that caregivers, when they are well and healthy and empathetic, they provide better care for our patients. We know this. And being able to have a more diverse group of caregivers increases the ability to be empathetic to a variety of patients. So by focusing on our employees' engagement and satisfaction, we know that our patients will receive better care. We've not cracked the code on all things diversity, inclusion, and equity by any stretch of the imagination. When compared to the community we serve, we are not diverse. We are still predominantly white. We are still predominantly male. So what we have learned to do and what we are continuing to do is making efforts in all areas of inclusion, equity, to foster a more diverse workplace and increasingly be able to care for a more diverse patient population. Our work is ongoing. We just completed another round of employee listening sessions. We'll take the time to compile everything that they have given us and look at, from those inputs, what will be our best opportunities to determine the improvements we can make to help address those needs. I do think that I can report that we've made some progress. We're having conversations among our leadership and our frontline employees about diversity and inclusion that we've not previously openly discussed here at Medic. And we've received personal and public appreciation from a variety of kind of niche groups, including active and reserve military, transgender, and non-US born citizens that have indicated that we are the most supportive employer environment for whom they have worked. So we think that our efforts are making a difference, and we'll talk about some of those. First thing we'll talk about are the dimensions of diversity, and Amanda's slide showed this as well, that it's a lot of different dimensions of diversity. It's not as simple as the ones that we tend to talk about most readily. Those internal dimensions, those are really the ones that we think about when we traditionally think about diversity. Age, gender, race. They are more of the internal you are born with those characteristics, usually typical as biological factors, typically seen that way. The secondary dimensions are environmental, and they're subject to change, subject to a person's choice. They include things like religion, hobbies, and where you actually live. The tertiary level are those organizational ones, and they're created within and by the policies and procedures of the organization. We've started to evaluate how shift assignments impact our employees. It may actually be harder for us, for instance, to recruit single parents, because when they come in as new employees, they are more likely to have shifts that are evenings and weekends when it's harder to get daycare resources. And so those types of organizational dimensions are things that we think about when we start to think about structures that may prevent more equity. Another one that we've started to talk about is our requirement to have a reliable way to get to work. Seems simple, but when you start to think about somebody who may rely on public transportation on days when we have inclement weather or days when there might be public unrest, which is when we need them to be here, those are not going to be reliable ways for them to get to work. And so we are ideally looking at how we can potentially open that up for other individuals. Becoming more familiar with these levels of and dimensions of diversity makes it easier for us to have conversations with our employees, and hopefully opens the door for them to feel more validated. An individual who can be recognized as more than one-dimensional may see that they do in fact have a future here at Medic and in EMS in general. In order to gain diversity, we really need to talk about the more difficult challenge, which is the next slide about inclusivity. You have to have an environment that will support diversity. You can't just recruit diverse individuals and be like, well, great, they're here, no problem. Instead, you really have to figure out a way to make them see themselves as a part of the whole. The reality is they won't stay unless they believe and they feel that they are included. The hard part of building an inclusive and equitable environment as a leader is you cannot convince someone that they're included. They have to believe it personally. They have to see it and feel it. So building the opportunities to connect with employees in personal ways to our agency mission and our community. We provide a variety of ways for individuals who seek connections and activities to bond and engage. I'll talk about a variety of experiences we offer that are opportunities both for our employees to explore their opportunities and increase kind of their personal development and professional development, but also opportunities to introduce the community to EMS, some who may not know it. This win-win type of program allows interested employees a way to feel great connection, particularly important for our Generation Y employees who desire flexibility and a desire to work with an employer instead of for an employer. One important note of caution, as you take on any initiatives in this area, you have to realize implicit and explicit bias exist within all of your employees, all of us. Some employees will resist overtly or subversively efforts to increase diversity, inclusion, and equity. What we have found that having a common language and direction among leadership allows us to prepare, recognize these roadblocks, and prepare for the difficult conversations when people are identifying that they have difficulty or they have concerns about the direction that we're headed. In the next slide, I'll talk about an experience that our leadership has had where we have learned about our role as influencers. Inclusion and equity is not about causing others to change, it's about trying to educate and influence. So likely the change will actually occur personally, and it can't be our intent to head into a conversation with the intent that the employee will come out of that with a different perspective. Their perspective is their perspective. We have to help them see how to have a diversity of thought and empathy towards others with different realities. So this common leadership experience, we were really lucky. 3 years ago, we got involved with a local organization called Community Building Initiative. They were created in the wake of rioting in Charlotte back in 2016. We had Keith Lamont Scott, who actually died at the hands of police. Sounds very familiar. Similar to the recent worldwide protests after the death of George Floyd. The death of Keith Lamont Scott here in Charlotte inspired both peaceful protests in support of Black Lives Matter and rioting. The riots were a watershed moment in Charlotte history. Our community has benefited through the development of many organizations like CBI. But what that has allowed us to do is we go through, as leaders, 2 at a time, we go through a year-long program of discovery led through CBI's Leadership Development Initiative. We have, through that, brought back our experiences to MEDIC, and it has allowed us to develop a common language. Each of the 2 participants will go through. They will go through the year-long program and come out on the other side with initiatives that they can then put in place here at MEDIC, and we can all support each other on all the work towards building a more equitable agency. While CBI, for us, is a local, obviously, and specific to Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we were not even aware of it until we asked a board member about some opportunities for us as we were looking to expand our experience. And they said, oh, they've been through this excellent program and they got us involved. And I say all of that to encourage you to seek out similar opportunities within your own communities you may not even be aware of. There may be nonprofits aimed at developing these discussions and experiences within your own community. You might have similar experiences available, or you might have partners willing to help you develop those. Something that the leadership can share on an ongoing basis that can drive conversations in this area. So next I'll start to talk about some of the initiatives that are employee-centered, both internally and about recruiting. The first one is our diversity resource group. We have a robust improvement methodology here at MEDIC. It guides us in developing, testing, and implementing change concepts. The diversity resource group was created as the result of an improvement project aimed at employee engagement. And so employee members will apply and interview just as they could for any other internal position. The applying obviously allows them personal and career development, requires them to update their resume, go through an interview process. But then if selected, the 2-year-long commitment provides them a myriad of enrichment engagement opportunities. So beyond the obvious, work of actually developing and impacting our agency inclusion efforts directly, the members also receive education about biases, essentials of how to have difficult conversations, more about our improvement methodology, elements of building a business case. All of this they take and are exposed to, which provides them more of those dimensions of diversity we talked about in that tertiary or organizational level, which makes it beneficial for them as well as for us. We do select these members of the diversity resource group with the primary, secondary, and tertiary characteristics in mind to ensure that we have a variety of perspectives. Predominantly the members are frontline employees. We do assign an administrative supervisor as a facilitator to help them navigate budget and planning process, things that they may not be as familiar with. And since they are predominantly frontline employees, the challenge of coordinating meetings and getting administrative things done, we do have a supervisor, an administrative supervisor who facilitates for them. We don't require their meetings to be held during traditional business hours. Instead, we offer support after hours and now virtually for what works best for the committee. And the team members are paid for their time, which is usually at an overtime rate, as we are committed to supporting the success of this group. Members can nominate the co-chairs. The co-chairs will be responsible for organizing and leading the meetings, and they meet regularly with the sponsor. And our sponsor is a director-level sponsor, so one of the deputy directors, who will attend the meetings when specifically requested, but does not attend regularly in an effort to allow the group to develop on their own and work independently. So next, let's look at what they have done over the last 2 years. The first one is a cultural fair. their initiatives have been really varied. That they're not always what somebody would see as traditionally diversity focused, but they have been about building community through inclusivity. And so in the 2008, during our health fair, they provided the space and tools for our employees to participate in a version of the Kindness Rock project. You've probably seen this in a park you've been to. Our employees painted personalized messages on images on rocks that were then distributed throughout our parking lot for other employees to find. So something that represented them individually. During EMS Week 2019, the DRG sponsored an international fair. This was a big hit. The DRG provided the environment where employees could volunteer to share their culture. Some of the participants had family members who came with them, but all of them shared history, food, music, and attire that were integral to their ancestral or cultural home. And it was a huge hit. It was a lot of fun. During our 2019 health fair, the group did interactive activities where you could face a coworker and you had questions that were provided to help prompt a conversation about what's important. What defines them? And then during the early days of the protests following the death of George Floyd, the DRG altered a popular motto that is out there in common. We stand against racism. We stand for equity and inclusion. We stand together. They painted it on a large banner that they hung up in the bay, and then they encouraged employees to add their handprint or signature in support of that message. And our employees really appreciated the opportunity to express themselves and outwardly show their support in the midst of COVID. Super busy handling all things COVID and treating all their patients, and it was just a quick opportunity for them to recognize the larger piece ongoing in the world. So all of these have been well received and had strong participation, and we look forward to seeing what their next round of initiatives are over the next 2 years. Right. One of the other initiatives aimed at increasing our diversity and recruiting future professionals in EMS, we restarted our Explorer post. We'd had it years ago and got away from it. And so looking for high school age students, both male and female, we worked through a pre-existing relationship with the Boy Scouts of America in our local school system. We recruit interested participants from throughout the county who are 16 to 20 years old and interested in spending at least a year learning about EMS. The post meets once a month, learning CPR, patient assessment skills, riding along on shifts, and also observing our telecommunicators in our communication center, responding to 911 calls. There's an additional engagement opportunity for our employees through this Explorer post. They apply to be paid instructor or mentor, and they apply just as they would for any other internal position. If selected, they're paid for their time as instructors. And we have an administrative employee who functions as the lead for the Explorer post in addition to other duties. The diversity has been more representative of our community than our employees are at this point in time, except that we have seen almost all females. So we have had very few males, which is unusual and exciting to see in EMS. So we only had one male in our first year, and we only have 2 currently out of 26. So we also have an opportunity through for high school internships during the summer. We participate in this program through the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, and they go to public high schools, juniors and seniors with an interest in healthcare. Specifically, we can also drill down into those that are more interested in EMS, but others may just have a general interest in healthcare. They come to us for the summer months. They are paid for their time, and because it is administered by the county government and city government, it's only a mild lift for us to build schedules and create the opportunities for a handful of students. They learn many aspects of EMS, and with both the Explorers and these paid interns, we have included them as patients in MCI drills, which always seem to come up, and everybody needs us to supply patients. So one at the airport, a couple at the community colleges, and then hospital training drills. This program provides our employees another connection to the community, and the employees responsible for the program receive an introduction to supervising others, including monitoring their attendance, having difficult conversations about expectations, and mentoring as well. Both of these groups, the explorers and the interns, are not just a direct representation of EMS, but they go home and they tell their friends and they tell their families and they tell their classmates about what EMS is, and that we're healthcare, we're not just ambulance drivers, which in our area, we're not fire-based, and so EMS is kind of misunderstood or unrepresented in the public community. And so this has given us an idea or a way to communicate out to the others in the community and let them know, and that it's a future potential career option. And so we take this also through to recruiting to the schools, and we start young. We go to elementary and middle schools, whether we do it through teaching hands-on CPR or whether we go specifically as a recruiting to a careers event day. We support academies in the local high schools aimed at public safety, police, fire, and EMS, and also health sciences. And both of those programs, high school seniors can graduate with all of the elements and education needed, and then once they turn 18, they can actually sit for their EMS exam and be certified and available for hire at that point in time. Starting early provides community benefits, providing school guidance counselors with paths for those who are interested in a healthcare field, but may not be interested in a 2 or 4 year degree. You know, this is a low investment option for the medical field to get in as an EMT. And so we want people to be aware of that. We can provide a career with state retirement if they get in as an EMT. So it could be a huge benefit for somebody who wants to go into healthcare but doesn't know any avenues other than nursing or being a doctor. As we discussed earlier about developing kind of win-win scenarios, a tremendous amount of social science research has shown that giving minority youth, particularly minority males, an alternate reality with employment and potential for a career can help break the school to prison pipeline created by structural inequalities in our communities. And so making meaningful connections early with at-risk youth allows them a vision of a different reality. Social science has also shown that in order for the minority students to recognize the opportunity, it's really important for the recruiter to be a mirror for them, i.e. a person of color or a person who is a minority when possible. So we try to do that when we can, depending on who the audience is going to be. And starting early, we then created at Medic a paramedic incentive program. So if we can recruit diverse EMTs, which we think is the easier of the two, recruit diverse EMTs and then bring them in and give them a career. This also developed out of an improvement project aimed at employee engagement, and it provides us an opportunity to grow our own diversity, essentially. When we recruit EMTs, we prioritize those that are interested in going on to become paramedics. And so we already have connections with those programs we just highlighted to recruit more through EMS and at the EMT level. Once they come in, this program allows them essentially a total of a 10% increase and bonus amounts equaling $2,500 in financial assistance to balance the reality of working full-time and going through demanding paramedic program. The idea of the 5% increase during schooling was potentially to compensate them from overtime that they wouldn't be able to work because of the other commitments. We've already had more than 20 EMTs upgrade to paramedic through this program and 28 more that are in school. So significantly higher numbers than we would be able to recruit. Within 6 months after they upgrade to paramedic, they're eligible to become a relief crew chief with a 5% pay increase, and then the ability to become a crew chief with an additional 10%. This is particularly attractive to our Gen Y and Gen Z employees. It gives them that quick, rapid-fire career progression that they really desire, and will benefit us with engaged paramedics starting out their career with us. And since each one of these steps takes time, we can count on more of them staying for longer than 5 years of employment. And we're monitoring currently their longevity to understand if this program just naturally extends their time with us here at Medic. So I'm going to close out with kind of our current state where I actually started with as well. We do not believe we've achieved an acceptable level of diversity, inclusion, and equity. We're actively working towards all three. We do see the effort in these areas as a direct investment in our people and thereby our patients and our community. With each new employee that we hire, we add new dimensions of diversity, richness to our agency. And as more individuals are able to come and join us and bring their whole self, we do feel that more will be welcome here, not just in Medic, but in EMS as well. And with that, I will turn it back over to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing all of the exceptional programs that Medic has implemented to date. And we hope that you'll keep us updated as you learn more about perhaps the increased longevity of or tenure of those employees that you have grown from high school, or it sounds like maybe even earlier in some cases. And I just wanted to give a quick reminder to everybody that is on the line. If you have questions for our panelists and you're joining us via the Zoom broadcast to our members, please click the Q&A link to submit a question, and we'll take all of them at the end. If you're joining us from the Facebook page, please just chat your questions in the comments, and we'll be sure to pick those up as well. So now that we have a really great foundation of some examples and innovations from Medic, we want to ask you to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the program this simple question. What do magnets, glue, and sidewalk ramps have to do with diversity and inclusion? So the first thing to recall, which I think Sharon alluded to, is that EMS is a rapidly growing profession. It's expected, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to grow 7% in the next 10 years, or the next 8 years even. And as everyone on the line knows, recruitment and retention remain very challenging issues in EMS. How can you make yourself, as an employer, magnetic? How can you attract the top talent to your organization, particularly when there are so many other EMS organizations, hospitals, emergency rooms, and even other career paths, from fire to being an ER tech, competing for the very same talent pool. It is our belief that having a diverse and inclusive culture, just like was demonstrated at Medic, is the ticket to making yourself a magnetically attractive employer. It's also the ticket to helping EMS swim in that broader talent pool that we talked about. I do have a few additional examples that sort of align with what was discussed at Medic that were provided by Debbie Alisk. She was originally intended to be one of our panelists today. She is the Executive Director and CEO of ProCare Ambulance in Baltimore. Many of the same types of initiatives that you heard of at Medic are also going on in ProCare. And one of their primary focuses is to be attractive to the diverse community that they serve. So one additional tip that they ask that we be sure to share is that it's essential to ensure that you integrate wholly within the communities that you serve. So adding on to what Sharon was saying, they wanted me to relay on Debbie's behalf that it's essential to, as you recruit employees, take a look and see if you're able to provide your staff volunteer opportunities back out in the community that will then continue to enrich and nurture your relationship with the community and provide enhanced awareness of EMS as a career path and a profession. So again, Demi, we're so sorry that you couldn't join us, and thank you so much for sharing your insights on this topic. Sharon also touched on this, that the demographics of the EMS industry are not representative of the demographics of our country as a whole. In fact, only 3% of newly certified paramedics are Black. That's in comparison to 12% of the US population as a whole. 10% of newly certified paramedics are Hispanic, in comparison to 18% of the overall population. And just 23% of newly certified paramedics are female. You can see these numbers in the right-hand column. In the left-hand column, you can see the same figures about these demographics as EMTs. So you can see that there's significant fall off from the EMT certification level to the paramedic certification level as people progress in their EMS careers, EMS becomes less diverse. So it's really essential that we work collectively to implement programs like that paramedic incentive program that Sharon discussed that will help keep diverse populations engaged in our profession beyond that first introductory step. How can you attract diverse people? Bell Ambulance in Milwaukee, which is one of the most diverse cities in our nation. Chris Anderson, would you please be able to give us some insights about what you do to try and attract diverse talent in your area?
Absolutely. So this all started about 4 years ago, this particular program. We struggled with the same recruitment and retention issues that I'm guessing everyone that's listening today has struggled with or is struggling with. And we started talking about, you know, the age-old idea that we can't just do it this way because we've always done it this way. And once we accepted that and actually realized that that is about the worst reason in the world to continue doing what you're doing, it made it a little bit easier for all of us to start thinking outside of the box. So one of the problems we had here, at least in this market in Milwaukee, is, you know, we would come up with some incentive to get EMTs or paramedics to come work for us. But all we were doing was transferring people between basically 3 competing services. So that wasn't really working. You know, we can't just steal from another within the same system. It doesn't help. So we decided, how do we make more? How do we make new EMTs? And yes, the normal pipelines were there with the technical colleges and things like that, but they just weren't expanding. Their class sizes were the same for years. It was very stagnant. So we decided to take some of the ideas that we had seen at other services, particularly other AAA members, and actually the Milwaukee Fire Department has had a long-standing cadet program where they go out into the community and they recruit high schoolers, you know, upon graduation. They hire them, they train them, and then a year and a half later, they have a brand new firefighter. And they were seeing a lot of success in increasing their diversity in doing that. So that was one of the things that was very attractive to us. So we basically modeled it after what they were doing. We go to high schools, we go to job fairs, we even go to colleges and universities, and we offer people a job. We offer them the opportunity to be trained as an EMT while getting paid, kind of changing the old model, turning it upside down, I guess, and then giving them a job upon completion. And, you know, because we had the time to work with them while they were going to class, they were also coming to see us for, you know, on the job training. We had all of that stuff done by the time they finished the class. They were ready to go. You know, all of the hiring stuff had been done, orientation, everything. So it really, really helped quite a bit. And you know what? The first time we did it, our success was not great. We only had about 50% successful completion, but we didn't let that discourage us. We learned from it and we improved each time. And now we are actually doing the class in-house. And that's what one of the photos there is showing. We partnered with one of the training centers in the area, and basically, you know, we now have our own training center without actually operating our own training center, which is a goal of ours. But you know, this is the next best thing. So we've moved from the students going to the technical school location to actually doing it in-house. And we have an employee of ours on our management team who oversees and mentors and tutors the students. And sometimes that means calling them and saying, hey, you have a test today, you know, everything we talked about, you're going to pass the test, right? And holding them accountable and almost leading them by the hand. And for years, I think a lot of us thought, oh, we don't want to have to do that. We shouldn't have to do that. These are adults. Well, look, you know, either you decide to change and move forward and come up with new ideas and do some of the things that you didn't want to do in the past, or, you know, I guess suffer the consequences of doing nothing. So I think it's been a very successful program. We look forward to expanding it and for it to only grow in the future. And I understand there is a cost to that, and you know we're dictated by you know, reimbursement that we receive and don't receive for that matter. But if my recommendation would be to take a really close look at what it actually costs you to hire or replace someone. And if you haven't ever done that, I think you'll be surprised at the number. And I think that will help you justify the cost of a program like this. And certainly available, and Amanda can put you in touch with us if you have any questions about the cadet program. In addition, we do a paramedic scholarship. Again, same reasons. You know, we wanted to create more interest in people becoming a paramedic, and it's similar to what Sharon was explaining at Medic. We work with people, we adjust their schedules. You know, we pay for the class, or most of the class, I should say. We call it a scholarship program. It really is tuition reimbursement. And we help them, you know, we mentor them, we make sure that they pass the class, rather than just saying, oh, you want to be a paramedic? All right, go become a paramedic and let us know when you're done. We're much more engaged now, and it's also been successful. It's helped us quite a bit. In our region, in our market, our biggest challenge is losing paramedics to the fire service. EMTs, not so much. Most of the departments around here only want to hire people who are qualified. And, you know, we've talked with several of the fire chiefs, and they've said, well, we really like hiring your people because they're well trained and they're proficient. Well, that's a great compliment, but it doesn't help us. So the paramedic scholarship has also been very successful. We started at the same time about 4 years ago. Right now we're doing 3 people per year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but obviously it's a significant investment. So that's been the cap so far. And again, with anything that's successful, we hope to expand it. Last but not least, critical care training in Wisconsin. We do require a structured critical care course in order to get the license endorsement. It's actually a license level above paramedic in Wisconsin. So we do the same thing there. We, you know, we pay for the class. We actually had been doing the UMBC courses around the country. So we would pay for travel and lodging and pay the salary for the individual while they were gone. And again, it's an investment. You know, using that employee now in a critical care role will easily pay for that investment over time. However, there's a challenge with COVID. The classes are all but suspended, and they're very difficult to find right now. So we're looking at options for doing that locally, which will obviously make it a more affordable option, taking out the travel expenses. But yeah, so that's what we're doing. And again, if you have any questions, we'd love to talk about it. We have a group of people here who are heavily involved, who love sharing our experiences with others. And not that we have all the answers, but we can tell you what we've done that's worked, and certainly help you if you're interested. So Amanda can put you in touch with us.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. One sometimes overlooked element of inequity that is closely related to recruitment can be salary. So I think most people in EMS have roughly set salary tiers for their EMTs and paramedics and dispatchers. But when you're looking at recruitment and retention for your leadership level tier, just very quickly, it is important that you make sure that you are very closely tracking local laws. This is not a legal broadcast, but Scott Moore is happy to answer any questions that you may have on this topic. but in many cases, it is considered best practice not to ask people for their salary history. Instead, it's very important to set your salary tiers for your leadership positions based on what a position is worth to you, not what someone previously made. Because if you're basing your salary decisions on past earnings, that can enhance, over time can enhance inequity, because men and white people are typically paid more often for the same work. So over time, if you're pricing your positions based on salary history, you can end up entirely accidentally or inadvertently paying two different people with different demographics, different wages, simply because of salary history inequity. This brings us to the next big bucket of topics that we wanted to cover today, and this is about retention. So how can you make your employees that you've worked so hard to attract, be magnetic to attract, stay with you longer? In web design, and that concept is known as stickiness. So the websites that you visit every day and can't get enough of, whether it's Google or Facebook or YouTube, are said to be very sticky, because once you're on the page or in their website, you stay for a very long time because you're engaged and you're completely hooked. How can we grow employee retention in EMS? Chris referenced that in some areas, you know, your employees could be it can be a revolving door where you're losing them to the service next door, and then they're coming back to you if you give a 25-cent raise. And that is extraordinarily expensive and inefficient, and there's a huge amount of human capital and knowledge lost when you have really, really high turnover. So some of the retention strategies that our panelists are going to talk about today may seem really expensive or unattainable. But it's really important to realize that if you don't stop the churn, even if you're not directly outlaying funds, and in some cases you are with things like with paying for things like recruiters and ads, but there are hidden costs of turnover. Chris alluded to this as well. The cost to replace a full-time paramedic in 2019, as per the American Ambulance Association and Avesta turnover survey, is $7,700. The cost to replace a full-time EMT in 2019 is $6,400. These are average. If you are in a major metropolitan area or an especially remote area, these costs may actually be much higher. So when you are taking a look at the cost to implement some of the employee engagement benefits that we're going to talk about next, please keep in mind that if you spend even $7,600 instead of $7,700 to retain an individual one more year, you've actually perhaps come out ahead. So with this, we've got a few slides here where we're capturing some quotes from some of actual field providers who chose to email their thoughts directly to the American Ambulance Association as part of our diversity and inclusion project. This particular individual noted that over the past 3 years, their organization has become more diverse and encourages EMS to market to people at school, just like Sharon and Chris are already doing, as well as to approach EMS as a career path for people who are visual and hands-on learners, which I think is another exceptional, path and tack to take. So one of the things that we're going to encourage you to do is to invest in your employees, as we've said several times now. Many people are familiar with the curb cut effect. When the Americans with Disabilities Act was rolled out, and cities and towns were required to begin creating ramps on the edges of sidewalks. Originally, this was just intended to facilitate easier motion by people traveling in a wheelchair. Absolutely everyone who's pushed a stroller or a shopping cart, or as Sharon pointed out, a stretcher, has benefited from the introduction of curb cuts universally across our country. Most employee benefits are just like curb cuts because they may have an outsized effect on one group, but typically they benefit all. We're not going to dwell on these slides that show statistics about workforce composition or the way to best accommodate the enormous percentage of the workforce that has a disability of some kind. But when you are thinking about dimensions of diversity, this one is typically overlooked. 26% of US adults have some kind of disability, and that could be physical disability, learning disability, range of motion. There's an absolutely fabulous website called askjan.org that has a list of suggested accommodations by disability. So if you have someone who has applied to work in your organization or who has developed a disability or who has expressed to you a disability, there are ways that you can accommodate this person, probably with really limited impact on your overall workflow, that will allow you to retain this person and perhaps in a different role, perhaps in a modified role. Scott Moore, who's on the line, is an expert in figuring out what the legal lines are as far as requirements for accommodating disabilities. But we highly encourage you to visit askjan.org to realize that there are a broad range of accommodations out there that might help you attract and retain employees from that 26% of adults that are living with some kind of disability. You don't want to take 26% of the US population off the top as available as your employees. Scott, any thoughts about that? I'm sure I said something legally horrible, but
no, actually you nailed it. I think one of the things that I often tell folks are, as EMS agencies, we presume that every person, if for example they have a physical disability that they could not meet the essential functions of a job for lifting or carrying, recognize that we are also a dispatch organization, we're a billing organization, we're an education organization. And so if you are just presuming everybody has to be a physically functioning paramedic or an EMT, I would suggest that you really are missing an opportunity to a whole group of people who would love to be part of, or are already part of a workforce, or who you are just not even marketing the position to because they may not realize. Like when I started as an EMT, I didn't know there were actually private companies. I thought it was just one big group of ambulance, one big ambulance organization. Recognize that for a lot of folks, we don't do a great job at promoting our career. And I think this is an area where I could not agree with you more. And the Jan website is outstanding. So great resource for folks, but 100%. I think this is an area where we just, if you look now at the number of folks who might have a disability organization, I'm going to bet it's a minority, much like gender and race.
Thank you so much. I think another piece that we'd like to address here with our panelists is how important it is to support the people who support your people in order to enhance your retention. So we've got a bunch of different statistics here. You can look at them at your leisure. The Bureau of Labor Statistics about workforce participation rates by women and by people of color. And you can see there is a sharp trend line down when people, particularly women, are at an age where they're likely to have young kids in the house. So there are huge opportunities in EMS to think of innovative ways to support people who are in the process of raising their own kids. Speaking of which, and then I will turn it back over to our panelists, it's also important to recognize that some of your employees and your future employees are going to come to you from a family structure that may not mirror your own. So it's important to recognize that you may have huge swaths of your staff living in multi-generational households, and that could be a single parent household led by a grandmother. It could be living with grandparents, raising grandchildren, anything that you can do to support those who are operating in, those whose home lives don't look like the traditional 1950s American family, if you can offer elder care benefits or otherwise support people who are bereaved at the death of a extended family member, you're showing support and humanity towards those who are keeping home fires burning while your people are at work. So Sharon, Chris, Scott, any thoughts about how we can, as EMS providers, support our staff and support their families?
Yeah, just one comment that I have, and a lot of people don't think of this when it comes to types of discrimination. There's the disparate impact discrimination, where you have a policy that actually negatively treats people. So you may not hire someone because of their race or their disability or their gender. And then there's disparate impact discrimination, which is you have a policy or a practice at your organization which is neutral on its face. So there's nothing in there that intentionally treats one group different than another, but its impact. So the best example of this I always use is the Mass State Police used to have a requirement that you had to be 6 feet tall to be a state trooper. Of course, anybody can be 6 feet tall. However, recognize that that is going to disparately impact women, who tend to be less women are 6 feet tall, and in some instances, certain races or folks of different national origin. So, just understanding that this is a good opportunity, and I think Sharon touched on this early on, that look at your policies, and it never even occurred to me on scheduling, and I've been doing this for 30 years, right? This is one of those things where you go, geez, you need to take a look at all of your organizations through a different lens. And I know in CAS, they require this when it relates to diversity, but the idea is to do some introspective, processes at your organization to see, are there things that are actually resulting in disparate treatment of folks or disparate impact of folks? Let me say that correct. And then, start to tackle those things one by one. And Sharon or Chris may have some comments on that, but I do think that this is one of those areas where at EMS, we have to recognize that if we are in fact disparately male and disparately Caucasian, we need to figure out and start to challenge those, because it is not that the new generation has changed, it's that we haven't. So I'll leave it to the others.
Yeah, I mean, Amanda mentioned that some of these programs may be expensive, or people may consider them to be prohibitively expensive. But if you just look at the list of bullet points here on the screen, some of these things, flexible spending accounts, flexible scheduling, breastfeeding locations, light duty accommodations, job sharing, some of those don't have any cost and have very minimal cost. And the payback is immense. Once you show that you truly care about the well-being of your employees, that's going to set you apart from if you have competitors, it'll set you apart from them. And our goal is to increase stickiness, right? That's the whole topic that we're talking about. Employee assistance program. If you're a AAA member, that's something that's available to you at no additional cost. And it's actually a very good, very robust program. So I think, really take a close look and don't just assume that you can't afford to do any of these things, because you really can. And I know that's pretty general, but I think you'd be surprised. And it's just taking the step of accepting that you want to do it and determining what you can do right away and what you can do going forward.
Yeah, and we talked briefly. Yeah, we talked briefly about the fact that we have paid maternity and paternity now. Yes, it is expensive. Yes, it does create more days that folks are not working. However, we've had employees who have chosen us simply because we do have that. And we have employees who say that they are going to stick with us because we have that benefit as they're younger and getting ready to start a family. So it makes a big difference. We've heard that directly.
Yeah, and if you take the statistics that Amanda provided with turnover cost, if you're a 100-person organization with a 33% turnover, which is roughly where we're all at these days, or where a lot of EMS, that's roughly $255,000 a year. And the problem is in breaking the cycle, because at some points we feel like we have to keep feeding the machine, and in order to change the way that we think about things, there needs to be a stopping process. You can begin this process in a slow evolution by adding certain benefits, and then taking a look at things like paid leave. Up here in Massachusetts, where the only folks that are more employee friendly than us might be California, New York, but we tend to see we do have required parental leave. We do have paid family medical leave. And, you know, the bottom line is you don't get to just hire the employee anymore. You actually, employees have an expectation. They are, you know, if your expectation is that they're going to adopt you and make a major part of their life, they expect their employer likewise. It's a 50-50 thing. So, you know, the best way to figure out is, are we an inclusive workplace, is to be asking your folks and really going beyond just the simple answer, because, you know, those folks who, when you say, hey, how are you? And what you really meant was hello, they know you're not actually interested in how are they. Get past that, dig a little deeper.
Which is a perfect segue into quarantine. So, Chris, I know that Bell has done some fantastic things for your staff with hazard pay and leave. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you're caring for your people that way?
Sure. This goes back to the beginning of the pandemic. In mid-March, we made the decision, once we were, you know, started learning about what we were going to be doing and what we were going to be facing, particularly with regard to quarantining employees who were exposed. You know, obviously there's the decision tree to determine whether quarantine is required, or, you know, was it truly an exposure or whatever. But once you determine that an employee has to be quarantined, we made the decision right away that we were going to do that. We were going to pay the employees, you know, whatever hours they missed. So if they're full-time, they're getting paid for the hours they would have worked. If they're part-time, we just came up with an average based on past work. And the key was to put that message out there right away, so people knew they didn't have to be afraid to tell us, hey, I think I was exposed, or I'm feeling sick, because we told people initially, we don't want you to come to work if you're feeling sick. Now, if you think about the effects of that, if people are afraid to tell you that they're, you know, developing symptoms and they think they may have been exposed, or they think they may have COVID, and they come to work and infect 3 or 4 or 10 other people, pretty soon it's out of control. And what would have been a manageable expense is no longer a manageable expense. So that was our reason for doing it. There is also some reimbursement available from the federal government through the CARES Act, which is capped at 80 hours. I don't think you'll find many people that are quarantined more than 2 times, so I don't think that's a huge concern. But again, you know, it was an easy decision for us, because we looked at what are the possible negative effects of allowing people to come to work, which basically, you know, in the beginning would have been against the CDC guidelines, and, you know, that's kind of a slippery slope to go down as well. So that's at least for us why it was easy to make that decision.
Sharon, anything to add on quarantine or COVID for your staff?
Just to reiterate what Chris said, you know, it allowed us, we did also pay our employees, or are continuing to pay our employees if they're isolated or quarantined, and it just allowed us to be more aggressive at protecting all of our employees and our patients by being able to say, yes, we do need you to stay home for a period of time, and there wasn't any pushback. They didn't have to use their paid time off. They didn't have to use any of that. And so it was just really a positive benefit for us to be able to control how many folks were being exposed when we had unknown situations. It was really helpful, and continues to be extremely helpful.
Well, and one of the things, it's not an all or nothing proposition. So the Families First Coronavirus Response Act did provide employers who were employed emergency responders or healthcare providers to exclude from the definition of eligible employees those folks who would be eligible to get emergency paid, either sick or family medical leave. But the Act further provides, and they address this in their frequently asked questions, further provides that the employer can choose to provide emergency paid leave to some, but not others. And I say that with caution, because you do need to be very careful when you make determinations as to who you may pay or not pay. But one of the things that we found, and I just did a member advisory or a blog post on this yesterday for the AAA, was that we found that some folks have decided that because they had their vacation planned for the summer and they're a little bit antsy, they want to get up and go travel to Florida. And so In my state, if you travel out of the New England area and try and return, it's a mandatory 14-day quarantine or a negative COVID test within 3 days of returning or after you return, and then you can halt the quarantine. So an employer can set a policy where they say, look, if you happen, the real intent of paying this emergency leave was in the event that you became exposed, and as a result, we don't want you to lose money and you're going to be quarantined, as opposed to the employee who intentionally decided to knowingly leave the area, to subject themselves to a quarantine or travel order as a result of that. That's different. That's a different decision. In fact, I was on a Massachusetts bar event where one of the lawyers said you could terminate the employee. I don't know that I'd go that far, but what I would suggest is just recognize that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. And it does, though, as Chris and both Sharon say, it does impact ultimately the decisions your employees make and when they come to work.
Thank you so much for that insight. I think that anyone who has questions about return to work after a vacation to Florida or otherwise, I strongly encourage you to email info@ambulance.org, all of the details, so we can share it with Scott, and he can parse just how in trouble your employees should be for their extracurriculars. One dimension of ourselves that is becoming increasingly prominent, at least in the media in some areas, is how to best support your lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer, and other LGBTQ staff. So beyond the basics, of course, it goes without saying, you refer to people by the names and the pronouns that they prefer, full stop, not up for debate. Of course, enforce a zero tolerance policy for slurs or discrimination. Make sure that you treat the loved ones of your staff with the same respect you would treat your own loved ones. So use the terms that people prefer, honor those relationships the way that you would honor the quote unquote traditional nuclear family. There are a few practical tips that can really help you make all of your employees feel comfortable. If you could have a unisex uniform option, I think that is something that causes some individuals a tremendous amount of stress, and it doesn't cost you anything to allow people to wear the version of the uniform they feel most comfortable in, or to offer a gender neutral version. If people are expanding their families, whether it's through adoption or surrogacy or any of the myriad options that they have, make sure that you are equally supportive and celebrative of those milestones. Again, support the people who support your employees. If you have the option to be supportive in ways that may cost a little bit more money, but the relative number of incidences of this would be probably very low in your service. If you can support gender confirmation surgery or some of the other medical interventions that people may be interested in, I think it's really important from an equity perspective that you consider doing so and recognize that that employee is deserving of the same medical consideration that you would provide any other employee. So certainly that's a little bit more expensive than some of these other interventions, but again, Scott Moore is happy to help you navigate that and has done absolutely a fantastic job of helping AAA develop some content regarding supporting trans and LGBTQ staff. Bathrooms, locker rooms, be inclusive. Similarly, for religious issues, I'm sure that some of our panelists here have insights of what they do in their own services. The N95 beard mask fight is something that I think a number of services have addressed over the past couple of months. I'd love to hear your insights. Make it easy on yourself when you're having parties. Be mindful of food preferences. If you set things up from a buffet perspective and don't make people ask for vegetarian or vegan or halal or kosher, it's an inclusive and easy thing to do that doesn't cost any more money and prevents the need for people to single themselves out or feel singled out by asking for accommodations. The food stuff is making people feel uncomfortable about the way that they eat when you're trying to throw them a party is just a losing proposition. Buffets are wonderful. I cannot encourage that enough. Any thoughts from the panelists about scheduling flexibility for things like religious holidays or for prayer times or beards, uniforms, headscarves that you'd like to share?
Go ahead, Chris.
I see Chris.
I mean, I think, you know, it's in my mind, it's pretty simple. If there's something you're able to do, then do it. You know, if you can do it without affecting safety or, you know, the ability to do this is a unique job, right? But if you can allow things to happen or allow people to do anything that doesn't compromise safety, I think it's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, of course, keeping in mind that there are obligations under the law to work with folks who have either religious, you know, require religious accommodation due to facial hair, or, you know, I had an issue where I worked at an ambulance service and we used to always, as a general rule, provide meals on the holidays. And so at Christmas, you know, the COO at this organization handled the meals. And when we came back from following the holiday, I failed to ask him what he had served. Well, little did I realize he had served a food that typically the folks who volunteered to work on Christmas were of a faith where you can't have pork products. And he said, well, I didn't want to serve turkey again, so I served ham. And I said, oh, and those are the kind of things that you just need to consider that, you know, I say to folks is folks or people generally we will see get outraged about all kinds of stuff. And so recognize that when you hear about stuff about kneeling for the flag or some of those other things that universally sort of create a visceral reaction, recognize that these kind of things, it's imperative that if you want, you know, we don't want to push a single solitary person away from this career or this organization. It's imperative that you understand that, you know, we're not really in the position to be creating environments where we're not welcoming everyone, right? We want everyone here. We want to create an inclusive environment. And by the way, it ends up being a better organization. And I was listening to a SHRM event where they said, we don't pay attention to race or religion or gender. We just hire the most qualified person. And the three panelists said, I call crap on that one. They said, who determines what qualities make someone the most qualified person? Because when you have a racially diverse, a gender diverse, you know, a overall diverse workforce, you end up with a better organization in the long run. So if you're saying that we just hire the most qualified person, you need to be going a little bit deeper and digging a little bit deeper for that one. That's a little bit of a cop-out.
Speaking of benefits to your community and your ambulance service for hiring a diverse and representative workforce, 67.3 million Americans now speak a language other than English at home. So we've seen tremendous progress in ambulance services across the country as they work to hire staff that speak the languages that are most effective in their own communities. So I'm from Massachusetts, where you might think that the second language would be Spanish. I grew up on Cape Cod, so the most important language to hire for, most important second language to hire for is actually Portuguese, because of the exceptionally large and absolutely wonderful Brazilian community on the Cape. So as you are hiring and retaining employees, why not provide a pay incentive, pins, patches, or other recognition to people who are bringing their language skills to work for you every day? We allocated 75 minutes for this webinar, which is more than usual, and we're still running a little bit behind. But I did want to make sure that we touched on something that I think Sharon mentioned in her presentation, that sometimes transportation can be a challenge for some segments of the population, and that there are ways that you can provide supportive transportation benefits that might actually help people get over the hump to become a really fabulous employee for you. So here we've got some stats about people's access to driver's licenses and cars. Did you have any thoughts about how transportation benefits might be helping you at Medic? Oh, I think I was on mute again, but essentially I believe that you mentioned that being aware of people's transportation issues has helped you to engage a workforce, particularly a younger workforce, as new and trainee EMTs may be in some cases. Not all of them may have a personal vehicle. Not all of them may have a driver's license if you hire them as a tech or as or in another role at your ambulance service where they're not having direct patient care. But if you could provide a bus pass for $30 a month, or maybe for other transportation benefits, that may remove an obstacle that could allow you to attract and retain someone fabulous. Very last slide here, I saved it for last because this is most likely to be most offensive to those on the line with us today. So everyone that's here, everyone that's hung on, as you know, that EMS has a pretty bifurcated workforce. We happen to have 3 Gen Xers and a millennial on the panel today. However, for the most part, EMS, the leadership level is often people who are baby boomers, and the workforce in the field, in many cases, but not all, can skew a little bit younger towards millennial or even Gen Z. I'm here to tell you that the 22-year-old employee that is driving you crazy is not a millennial. That person is a Gen Z. Gen Z is the group that was born 1997 to 2012, and so they are joining the workforce in great force. And one of the most important things that you can do to be inclusive as an EMS leader is to stop referring to other generations negatively in the third person. So I've done so jokingly here today, but only to illustrate the point that it's essential that we use inclusive language. Everyone that works at your EMS service should feel that they are treated and respected as individuals and not looked down upon for being a lazy millennial, particularly when you really mean Gen Z, or a tech unsavvy baby boomer when they might be running the server room. So please treat people as individuals and keep your thoughts about the work ethic of any given generation deep inside as we grow the next generation of EMS leaders. So I have a few example questions here today of how questions that you can ask yourself and ask your ambulance service as you think about your next move as you work to build a magnetic and sticky EMS workplace. However, I'd really like to turn it over to Sharon, Scott, and Chris if they have any parting thoughts or parting advice to share with the group on the line here about how to get started on their path to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, one of the talking points that I had on one of my slides was don't wait for the perfect idea, don't wait for the perfect time. Starting anything, trying any initiative is better than doing nothing at all. Even if you don't feel like it may have been 100% successful, what did you learn from it and how can you apply it? So don't wait for perfect, just start trying something.
Yeah, I think
best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago, right?
Right.
Or today.
Right. That's great advice, though, and I'm, not to oversimplify it, but I think as soon as you decide that you want to try being better, and kind of dismiss the way that you've always thought about things, and just go into it with an open mind, I think that's a great way to start.
And
for anything, really.
Yeah, and I think the last part is, everybody's running in different directions. We find oftentimes that, we have leadership, especially right now during this crazy time, completely tapped out. Our employees are feeling very tapped out. I think one of the things that we can do, and this is the most important thing I think in that first step, as Sharon talked about, is you need to be communicating with your staff. You need to be asking questions. And by the way, one of the best ways to, start to let them know that this is something that's important to your organization is by asking those questions of those folks and sticking around long enough to make sure that the answer, it is may not be the answer you want. As Amanda said, when we beat up on millennials, most of them have house payments now and kids. So let's stop pretending like they're punk kids who have their face in their phone all the time. And really, as Chris said, is right, start that process. There's never going to be an ideal time to start it. And while I know a lot of people have the pandemic on their mind, right, a lot of people right now are reevaluating what their professional lives are going to look like and what they do. And this is a great time, very much so in the way that 9/11 was this jumpstart to a lot of people's public safety career. This is a time now where people are going, healthcare is always a field that's always going to be, we're always going to need folks, and it's a chance to do something with meaning. So I appreciate the content, and I'm just blown away by some of the stuff the organizations, my co-presenters organizations are doing. I think it's outstanding.
Even though we allocated an extra 15 minutes to this webinar, we still somehow went way over, but I'm so grateful to Sharon and Chris and Scott for sharing their time and insights today. Sharon has been all over the chat box, so I think we've addressed most of the questions we received there, and all of the questions we got on Facebook were how to get the recording and the slides. So I think that this webinar will hopefully have even greater reach than our 11,000 Facebook followers and the folks that were kind enough to join us here on Zoom. So again, thank you so much to all of our audience for joining us, as well as to our panelists for sharing their insights. We've got everyone's email address here, or of course you can always just email info@ambulance.org, and we will connect you to Sharon, Chris, or most especially Scott Moore, Esquire, to answer all of your EMS HR questions. So thanks again, everyone, and we hope to see you on the next Diversity Inclusion webinar. Bye.
Thank you.